This is a demo of MGUIDE, which is part of the MatPy GUI toolbox, which is available from matpy.com. It is for building advanced MATLAB GUIs very easily and interactively. You can launch it just by typing MGUIDE at the MATLAB command line, and this brings up the initial UI, first initializing your application. We give it a name, and then we decide on whether it's going to be tabs or pages. And once we start creating our tabs, we can have a few different things, whether they're closed buttons, title bars, they can be protected tabs. We'll have a help button, for example. So maybe we'll add a couple of tabs, and then we'll launch our application. And that brings up this GUI here, which is your designer for your application. On the left hand side there is all your UI controls for input. So here, for example, in the middle we have push buttons, sliders, checkboxes, pop-up menus, list boxes, etc. We just left click on one to select it, and then we just draw where we want it. And sort of say a list box, we can create a list box just the same way. And we can do this for all of the UI controls that we have here. There is two different types of axis. There is a normal MATLAB axis, and then there is an interactive axis for 2D applications. So if we'll create one of those, I'll just show you in a demo later on. So a couple of little things on it. Give us as an axis. The other things that we have here are for adding in, say, UI split. So we go to tab 3, we'll add in a split. And this is a way where we can have we can split our application into a number of UI panels. So we have 4 panels that we've introduced here. We can select each one, and then we can put UI controls on each of the individual panels, for example. We can also put in child UI groups. So this is effectively another group of tabs, for example. So we'll give it a slightly bigger button height since it's small, and we'll make the tabs slightly wider. So we can just give them different names, for example. So we add a few, and we click on apply, and then we see here that it's created them. And because it was wider than the available space, because all positions are normalized, the GUI can manage that, and will sort of change the size of the tab so that you can select the ones that are of interest to you at the time. So the other things that we can do, we can delete a UI group, we can add and remove tabs, and we can manage the splits as well. Down at the bottom here, we have a few other options. We can assign to the workspace, or we can save to a mat file. This will save a MATLAB variable, a structure, which contains all the information required to build the GUI with the MatPy GUI class. We can also run our GUI, so we just run it, and this will build our GUI with our UI controls on them. And this is we go to the second tab where I had my interactive axis. There's a number of things you can do with an interactive axis. One of the things is you can left and right click on the axis to zoom in, and you can middle click to reset. And you can also, if you double click with the right, you can introduce some annotation. So say we just want to write some text on this on the axis, so you can do that, and then you can customize the text, for example. So I'll just close that down, and then if you remember I said about we introduced a UI split. So this gives us the 4 panels, but it's slightly different than just 4 panels because it has callbacks already built in for dynamic resizing of your splits. And here we have the 4 tabs. They had title bars and they have help buttons, which is basically just a link to a callback that you can sort of associate with your own help. So if I close that down, the other one is the save an M file. Now the code which is generated behind all this can be viewed at runtime. Now that M file will either be a MATLAB function or a MATLAB class. That depends on your settings. So you can change between a function and a class. And the code is generated, and you can look at the code. And once you start to understand what's going on, you can add a UI control, say you can come back and see how the code has changed, etc. All the constructor here builds the GUI, and then after that there is all the callbacks are set up and put in as private methods to the class. The other there's a few other things in the settings which you can use to customize the code and customize the sort of the runtime. The other 2 things I haven't highlighted yet is this top panel here, which is for interactively selecting tabs and or pages sort of in the designer. So we can just we can manually select these. Now these are more for when there is pages rather than tabs, because pages don't have the tabs to select. So it just gives you access to be able to select them. You can also select protected tabs as well. And the sub panel list on the right hand side is just so if we created a UI panel, say, then we get that on the list here, and we can just sort of select it so that we make sure that any UI controls that we create are created in the correct place. On the right hand side there is properties, and that's all the properties of UI controls. So we right click on the get a UI context menu, and we can look at all the properties of any of the objects, so we can change them. These are all the normal methods that you would have from set and get, and you can interactively change them, and they are immediately reflected in the final application, which we can see here. So we've got the red text in the push button. This is a very quick introduction to the MGUIDE and the Matlab GUI toolbox. There's a lot more information on the website, and you can download a demo which will run for 30 days of the code.